Avoidants are notoriously difficult to get commitment from. They resist relationship progression, avoid labels, keep one foot out the door. But there are specific conditions under which avoidants do commit, and understanding these conditions reveals important truths about avoidant psychology. The catch is that these conditions have very little to do with love, connection, or you being special enough. Avoidants commit when a very specific set of circumstances align that make commitment feel safer than remaining uncommitted. These circumstances are about their internal state, their life situation, and their perception of risk rather than the depth of their feelings or relationship quality. Here's what needs to align for avoidants to actually commit, and what this reveals about whether their commitment is worth pursuing. When their fear of loss becomes stronger than their fear of intimacy. Avoidants only commit when they become more afraid of losing you than they are afraid of vulnerability. As long as their fear of intimacy is stronger, they'll remain uncommitted. But if something shifts the balance, if they genuinely believe you might leave, that fear can override their fear of closeness. This is why avoidants often only commit when you're actually walking away. The shift explains why avoidants can seem detached, then suddenly want commitment once you've given up. While you were available, their fear of intimacy dominated. But once you pull back, closeness is no longer threatening, and loss becomes the immediate threat. This fear-based motivation is unstable because if you come back and closeness becomes threatening again, they'll retreat from commitment. The fear-based commitment means their desire isn't really about you. They're not committing because they've realized you're special. They're committing because anxiety of losing you has become more uncomfortable than anxiety of being committed. This motivation is fragile because it's based on anxiety management rather than genuine desire for partnership. When commitment feels like the path of least resistance. Avoidants commit when staying uncommitted becomes more complicated than committing. This happens when external pressures mount, when you set firm boundaries, when their life situation makes commitment convenient, or when remaining uncommitted creates problems. They commit when it's easier to commit than to keep avoiding it. The path of least resistance commitment shows up when the avoidant faces social pressure or practical considerations. Maybe everyone is partnered and they feel left out. Maybe you've made clear you're leaving if they don't commit. Maybe living together solves financial problems. These external factors push commitment when internal desire wouldn't. This commitment is problematic because it's not based on wanting you specifically. It's based on commitment being the easiest option. If circumstances change, if commitment becomes harder, they'll likely retreat. You're dealing with someone who chose the easiest option, and you happened to be it. When they found someone who doesn't trigger their wounds. Avoidants can commit when they find someone who doesn't activate their core wounds. This is usually someone who doesn't need much emotionally, who doesn't push for vulnerability, who accepts surface-level connection. With this person, commitment doesn't feel threatening because it doesn't require stretching beyond their comfort zone. The non-triggering partner allows the avoidant to be committed while living essentially uncommitted. They can have social benefits of partnership without emotional risks. This is often who avoidants marry, not the person who made them feel most or challenged them to grow, but the person who required least from them. This explains why avoidants often don't commit to people they have most chemistry with. Those relationships trigger wounds intensely, but they might commit to someone they feel less for because that person feels safer. If you trigger their wounds, they may commit to someone more boring simply because that person doesn't activate their fears. When they've hit rock bottom with their patterns. Sometimes avoidants commit after running their patterns so many times they've hit breaking point. They've lost enough people. They've been alone long enough. They've watched everyone build lives while they're still running. This rock bottom creates enough pain that they finally become willing to commit and do the work. The rock bottom commitment comes from genuine recognition that their patterns aren't working. They're committing because they understand their defensive strategies are costing them what they want. This has more potential for sustainability because it comes with motivation to work on patterns. However, rock bottom doesn't automatically create skills needed for healthy relationship. The avoidant might have motivation but still lack capacity. Without serious therapeutic work, even motivated avoidants often fall back into patterns once acute pain fades. When their life stage makes commitment logical, avoidants often commit when they reach a life stage where commitment makes logical sense, when they want to buy a house, when they're ready for children, when being single feels socially awkward, when retirement approaches and being alone feels scary. These life stage motivations can drive commitment that emotional connection never could. The life stage commitment is practical rather than emotional. The avoidant is making a calculated decision that commitment serves life goals. This becomes problematic when they commit purely for practical reasons while remaining emotionally disconnected. This type of commitment tends to be with whoever is available when the life stage arrives. The avoidant isn't choosing the best partner. They're choosing someone who fits the practical need at the right time. When they've done significant therapeutic work, the healthiest condition is when they've actually done therapeutic work to heal their wounds. They've addressed childhood trauma. They've learned to recognize patterns and develop healthier responses. They've built capacity for vulnerability. When this work has been done, commitment becomes possible because the avoidant has genuinely changed. The therapeutic work commitment is rare because it requires recognizing patterns are a problem, seeking help, staying in therapy when uncomfortable, and implementing new behaviors. Most avoidants don't do this work because it requires the vulnerability they're defending against. Even with therapeutic work, commitment isn't guaranteed because healing is a process. An avoidant who's done work might commit with good intentions but still struggle. The difference is they have tools to work through struggles rather than running. When you stop pursuing and they have to choose. Avoidants sometimes commit when you stop pursuing and they're forced to make an actual choice. As long as you're chasing, the avoidant can keep all options open. But when you stop, they have to choose whether to reach out or let you go. The forced choice commitment happens because your pursuit was preventing commitment by making it unnecessary. But when your pursuit stops, access stops, and commitment becomes the price of having you. However, this commitment is reactive rather than proactive. They're committing because you forced a decision, not because they woke up wanting partnership. This reactive commitment can work if it prompts them to start showing up properly. What this means for you, waiting for commitment. Understanding these conditions should help you assess whether commitment is actually possible or if you're waiting for circumstances that may never align. Look at their situation honestly. Are they in therapy? At a life stage where commitment makes sense? Have they hit rock bottom? Are you walking away forcing a choice? If none of these conditions exist, commitment probably isn't coming. The conditions reveal that avoidant commitment often has nothing to do with you being special. You could be perfect and commitment still won't happen if conditions aren't right. This should free you from thinking you need to be better to earn commitment. Most importantly, even when conditions align, assess what type of commitment you're getting. Is it fear-based, convenience-based, practical, or based on genuine growth? The type of commitment matters as much as getting commitment. Fear-based commitment evaporates when fear subsides. Convenience-based commitment dissolves when it's no longer convenient. If you're waiting for an avoidant to commit, ask yourself honestly whether you're waiting for conditions that will never align or whether you're willing to accept commitment not based on them genuinely wanting partnership with you. Often the healthiest choice is to stop waiting and find someone who wants to commit without needing perfect circumstances first, when they see you as different from everyone else who triggered them. Another condition that enables avoidant commitment is when they genuinely perceive you as different from the people who hurt them originally or triggered their wounds in past relationships. If the avoidant can see you as safe in ways others weren't, if they can believe you won't abandon them like their parent did or engulf them like their ex did, they might be able to commit to you when they couldn't commit to others. This perception of you as uniquely safe can override their usual defensive patterns. The problem with this condition is that it's based on the avoidance perception, which can be distorted and unstable. They might see you as safe initially because you're patient or understanding, but the moment you set a boundary or express a need, their perception can shift. Suddenly, you're just like everyone else who wanted too much from them. The safety they felt was based on you not triggering their wounds, but staying human and having needs inevitably triggers those wounds eventually. This condition also puts enormous pressure on you to remain the idealized safe person they've constructed in their mind. You can't have bad days. You can't express hurt or frustration. You can't need anything that makes them uncomfortable. The moment you step outside the narrow box of the safe person they need you to be, their commitment can evaporate because the condition that made it possible, their perception of you as uniquely safe, has been violated. The perception of safety can also be genuine and sustainable if it's based on real compatibility and your actual secure attachment style rather than on you suppressing your needs. If you're naturally someone who needs less intensity, who values independence, who doesn't require constant closeness, the avoidant might genuinely experience you as less threatening than people who need more. But you have to be honest about whether you're naturally this way or performing this way to keep them comfortable, because performance isn't sustainable when they're exhausted from running and want to rest. Sometimes avoidants commit when they're simply exhausted from their patterns and want to stop running. They're tired of the anxiety their patterns create. They're tired of hurting people and dealing with the guilt. They're tired of being alone but unable to connect. They're tired of fighting their own desire for closeness. In this exhausted state, commitment can feel like relief rather than threat. It's a chance to stop struggling and just be with someone. The exhaustion-based commitment can be genuine and create an opening for real relationship if the avoidant uses the commitment period to actually rest into connection and discover it's not as threatening as they feared. Sometimes avoidants need to commit while exhausted because that's the only time their defenses are low enough to let someone in. Once they're in and realize it's okay, they can sustain the commitment even when they're not exhausted anymore. However, exhaustion-based commitment is risky because once the avoidant rests and regains energy, their defenses often come back online. They committed while depleted and vulnerable, but once they feel strong again, they may regret the commitment and want to retreat. This is why some avoidants commit during or after a crisis or difficult period, but then pull away once life stabilizes. The conditions that made commitment possible, their exhaustion and lowered defenses, no longer exist. This type of commitment requires the avoidant to use the committed period to build new neural pathways around connection being safe. If they commit while exhausted but spend the commitment period still fighting connection internally, they'll leave once they have energy to run again. But if they commit while exhausted and allow themselves to actually experience secure connection during that vulnerable time, they can develop new associations that make commitment sustainable even after exhaustion fades, when all their other options have been exhausted. A less flattering but common condition for avoidant commitment is when they've exhausted all their other options and you're what's left. They've dated around and no one was better. They've tried being alone and it's lonelier than they expected. They've pursued people who seemed easier and those relationships didn't work. They've explored what else is out there and come back to you as the best available option, even if you're not their ideal. This settling-based commitment is painful to recognize because it means you're not their first choice. You're their best option among limited choices. They're committing not because they can't imagine life without you, but because they can't find anything better and the alternative of being alone isn't appealing. This type of commitment can work in practical terms, but it often lacks the emotional depth and genuine desire that makes relationships fulfilling. The challenge with settling-based commitment is that it's unstable if better options appear. The avoidant committed because you were the best available, but if someone they perceive as better comes along, their commitment can waver. They didn't commit out of deep conviction that you're the right person. They committed out of pragmatic assessment that you're good enough given current options. This leaves you in a relationship where you're always potentially replaceable. However, settling-based commitment can evolve into something more genuine over time if the avoidant allows themselves to actually appreciate what they have with you, rather than constantly comparing to idealized alternatives. Sometimes people commit for practical reasons and then fall in love with the reality of the person and partnership. But this requires the avoidant to be present and invested rather than constantly wondering if they settled, which many avoidants struggle with. When the relationship doesn't feel like a relationship. Paradoxically, avoidants sometimes commit when the relationship structure doesn't feel like a traditional relationship to them. If you're long distance, so they maintain physical space. If you both have very independent lives with minimal overlap. If the relationship is casual in feeling even if committed in status. If there's an understanding that they need lots of alone time. These conditions can make commitment feel safe because it doesn't require the closeness and enmeshment they fear. The non-traditional relationship commitment allows the avoidant to have the benefits of commitment, security, companionship, partnership, without the aspects that trigger them. They can be committed while maintaining the distance and independence that keeps them comfortable. This can work if you're genuinely okay with this type of relationship structure and it meets your needs. But it becomes problematic if you're accepting this structure, hoping it will evolve into something more traditional once they feel safer. The risk with this condition is that the avoidant is only committed to the specific structure that keeps them comfortable. If circumstances change and more traditional togetherness is required, like moving in together or having kids, the avoidant might not be able to sustain commitment through that transition. They committed to a specific, low-intensity version of relationship, not to relationship generally, and increasing intensity might be more than they can handle even with prior commitment. This type of commitment requires both people to be genuinely satisfied with the non-traditional structure permanently, not as a temporary accommodation. If you're hoping the avoidant will eventually want more closeness, more time together, more integration of lives, you're likely to be disappointed. The condition that made their commitment possible was specifically that the relationship doesn't require those things, so asking for them undermines the foundation of the commitment. Why waiting for conditions to align is often waiting forever. The fundamental problem with waiting for an avoidant to commit is that the conditions required for commitment often don't align, or they align temporarily but not sustainably. You can't control whether the avoidant does therapeutic work. You can't manufacture rock bottom for them. You can't make their fear of loss stronger than their fear of intimacy. You can't force life stage readiness. Waiting for these conditions is waiting for things outside your control, which means you're giving your time and life to someone who may never be capable of committing regardless of how perfect you are. Even when conditions do align and commitment happens, there's no guarantee it's the type of commitment worth having. Getting commitment from an avoidant who's committing out of fear, exhaustion, or convenience isn't the victory it might seem like. You want someone who commits because they genuinely want partnership with you, not someone who commits because circumstances made it the least bad option. Distinguishing between genuine commitment and circumstantial commitment is crucial for protecting yourself from getting trapped in a committed relationship that's still emotionally empty. The healthiest approach is to decide what type of commitment you need and deserve, then assess honestly whether the avoidant is capable of providing it rather than waiting indefinitely for conditions that might never align. If they're not in therapy, not at rock bottom, not showing signs of genuine change, commitment probably isn't coming. And if commitment does come under conditions like fear or convenience, you need to decide if that's enough for you, or if you deserve someone who wants to commit to you without needing perfect circumstances first.